Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to BSing Sports, where we do a little BS and we talk a whole lot of sports. Welcome to season 3. Ryan, how you doing, bud?
We've been doing this for over 2 years, man. It's good to see you. It's been a while since I've seen your face. Over the camera. Anyway, we just went shooting last or 2 Fridays ago. That was pretty fun. But
That
it's been
was,
a
yeah,
while
you're
since
right.
we talked some sports.
Yes, indeed, it has. Looks like I might be having some connection issues, so if I'm lagging, I want to apologize to everybody.
You're crystal clear on my end, buddy.
Well, I love the way that sounds. So yeah, we've got NL East predictions for you. It's just how we're going to start off season 3 is with NL East predictions.
Got to
Let's
start
just
out.
get into it.
I think we got to start out with the assumed bottom dwellers of the division. Now anything can happen. Of course, this is a sport, and in all sports, anything can happen. But that being said, Washington Nationals they're in a very obvious rebuild mode here. A lot of their best pieces are young, kind of unproven prospect level. They just acquired C.J. Abrams last year at the trade deadline in the Juan Soto deal. They also have Carter Kieboom, who's still kind of developing. They have a very young rotation outside of Patrick Corbin and Steven Strasburg. We'll get into them in a second. And yeah, it's just a team that's very obviously going through a rebuild. And it was quite a surprising time in which they started that rebuild too, because they essentially just won a World Series and then kind of dumped the roster. So
yeah, it was an interesting approach to we just won now. Obviously they let Rendon go the season after the title. Harper had already left. They trade away Trey Turner, who's now a Philly. We'll get into that. But yeah, in addition to C.J. Abrams, they turn around and they get Mackenzie Gore in their starting rotation.
Fantastic. They got him in the deal too. I think they won that deal personally. I was high on both of those prospects to go with Jeter Downs, who is also going to be, developing in that infield. But yeah, looking at the ages of some of these players, they're a young team. I expect them to semi-compete, but ultimately I don't expect them to win a lot of games.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't expect them to win a lot of games. I am, and I don't. If you're in the same realm as I am, but I've got them at 60 wins this season.
I have them a little bit higher than that. I do see 63 wins, the 63 and 99. I think they avoid the 100 loss threshold. I think the biggest question for me is Steven Strasburg going to make it on this team? Obviously him and Corbin are the outliers here. Corbin's getting paid way too much money for the way he's produced in the last couple seasons. So it's going to be really hard to move him and his contract. But Strasburg, just hasn't been able to stay healthy the last few years. It's not really been an issue of is he effective or not, because in the minimal action we've seen him, he hasn't pitched poorly. He just can't stay on the field.
Yeah, I mean, he's also one of those pitchers who came out really, really, really able to fire the fastball, 98 to 100 miles an hour. He had to completely adjust his pitching strategy because now he's topping out at 92, 93 miles an hour. But he was doing a good job until he got injured 2 years ago. And since then, he just hasn't been able to bounce back. And every time he gets on the field, I feel like it's a new injury, a new finger, new elbow problem. And it's unfortunate because the kid was phenomenally talented coming out of college. And that's all I got to say about that.
I do remember the days when he was at San Diego State and he was, considered a can't miss prospect. And he certainly hasn't been a missed prospect when he has stepped on the field. He has pitched to the level of a number 1 overall pick, but it's just been how much can he stay on the field, right? Like you touched on, Tommy John early in his career went from throwing, 100 for 6-7 innings to, down into the mid 90s. And then as he's gotten a little older, it's gotten a little slower, but he has done a fantastic job reinventing himself as a pitcher. He won a World Series MVP the year that they won the World Series. So
that's true. Yeah.
He's been effective when he's pitched. It's just how much longer is he going to do it? And that's probably the only reason why he's still in the rosters. He just hasn't been healthy enough to trade him.
I have to imagine at some point this season, if they're really in the bottom of the barrel, like I'm predicting 30 wins by the All-Star break, I think the Nationals try and just get something for him at this point. And a team might be willing to take him on a very, very low risk situation. And that's just the, off the wall prediction, because if hypothetically, look, you got to play the game, right? Everybody's got to come out. They're getting paid to play. These professionals are going to come out and they're going to play, and they're going to try and prove themselves to be on the roster or somebody's roster moving forward in the future. So I could be wrong. Nationals could win 75 games, but right now I've got them at 60.
Well, 75 games is still not going to cut it. That's still a rebuild number. However, it is substantially better than 60 wins. I can't see a scenario where he makes it to the end of the roster this year. If he's healthy enough to pitch, I think he gets dealt. There's going to be injuries that happen on contending teams throughout the season, right? We've already seen a couple of big injuries across the MLB, and a lot of them have come from this division. We'll touch on them when we get to those teams. But there's going to be other injuries that happen throughout the year. Andrew Painter, Phillies' #1 prospect, already hurt, shut down in spring training. So stuff happens, and there are going to be teams calling for veteran arms that have pitched in big games before, and that, Steven Strasburg is the label of that. So, and the flip side, like Patrick Corbin, just they're not going to be able to move him. Not making over $23 million a year at his inflated, 6 ERA. It's just not going to happen.
It's just it is a lot of money. I mean, you're right. But if there's a team who's truly in contention and he's pitching well and they think that's the only thing they need, somebody might go get him.
And there could be some deal worked out where the Nationals eat the money or whatever. It's not like they have payroll issues. They don't have a lot of high paid guys on the roster anyway. If they just wanted to dump them and get rid of them, it's potential. It's possible. It could happen. I don't see a scenario where there's any sort of real, return for Patrick Corbin.
Yeah, that's fair. I would agree with that. You cut out there for a few minutes. I don't know whether it's me or you, but at one point you kind of froze up there. But I think we got the basic gist of it is that it's going to be real tough to move those guys. No, we're not talking the Cardinals.
With baseball season comes Logan Stone. Welcome back, buddy. Are we talking about the Cardinals are the favorite to win the World Series yet? I thought you were a converted Phillies fan. I saw a tweet out there during the World Baseball Classic that said you fully switched over. So, no, we are not talking about the Cardinals. We haven't even talked about the Phillies yet.
That is correct. We just got started. It's only been 8 minutes. Let's move on to the next lowest bottom feeder here in the Miami Marlins.
But as far as bottom feeders go, I don't think the Marlins are a bad team. It seems like every time the Marlins get okay, they just sell off all their good players.
And then they bring in other fans we saw what Gene's capable of, especially, in the playoffs. That 2-out single that scored 2 runs against the Cardinals, being something that's really big. Hi, Logan. How you doing? But no, and this is just like the MO of the Marlins, right? They've been doing it for years. They need a little bit of starting rotation help after Sandy Alcantara, who is, probably the best pitcher in baseball right now. You get a little thin, right?
You get a little traded it to the Minnesota Twins.
Yeah. So you've got Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, Pablo Lopez was a good second starter, especially in a division like that is full of good 1-2 punches at the rotation. And they trade him to the Minnesota Twins. It's another young piece that, probably could have been there at least a little bit longer, but I think
they moved on. They do go out and pick up Johnny Cueto, but to round out the rotation is not very solid. You got Luzardo, Trevor Rogers, Braxton Garrett, Edward Cabrera, and then everybody is saying keep an eye on Sixto Sanchez, but I mean he just had Tommy John. I can't imagine he's coming back anytime soon. But I guess we can keep an eye on Sixto Sanchez. But yeah, the rotation in Miami just isn't really strong. And to listen, Jazz 60 games last year, Jazz Chisholm was one of the best players in baseball, but he's extremely streaky. It was only for 60 games. You know what I'm saying? So if he's able to put it together for an entire season, the Marlins are going to be able to do damage, and they're going to look to play playoff spoilers for these other 3 teams that we're about to talk about. And that's the reality of it.
Yeah, the Marlins are a confusing franchise. It's almost like that they're trying to play Moneyball again. You trade a guy like Pablo Lopez to go sign a guy like Johnny Cueto, who is probably a thrown away, forgotten veteran that shouldn't be in that status. I think Johnny Cueto has pitched better than most people would give him credit for. Granted, he's not the young Johnny Cueto he was with the Cincinnati Reds early in his career. But speaking of dudes that have reinvented themselves as pitchers, that's exactly what Johnny Cueto did. We've all seen the 85 different windups he can come bring to you throughout the MLB season. So he has a different way of keeping hitters off balance, and he's pretty good at it. He doesn't need to throw mid-90s to get the job done. But to sign an older arm like that after trading away Pablo Lopez, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And then signing Gene Segura, there's a lot of questionable moves. It's like, are you rebuilding? Are you trying to just be like okay enough? What's the deal?
It's like they're retooling, not rebuilding. And I mean, listen, we've experienced it several times in our time with the Phillies. Retooling doesn't get you victories, right? It doesn't get you a World Series victory, and that's ultimately the end game. And I just, with the roster they're holding right now, their lack of pitching depth, I got the Marlins winning 75 games.
That's the exact number I had in my head. I think 75 and 87, somewhere in that neighborhood. I think that's a great number for the Marlins. I don't think they're a bad roster. I think that if they were in a extremely weak division, they could be close to 500. However, the three teams that we're going to talk about after them, they're close to juggernaut status. I do think that this is the best top three teams of a division in baseball. You know, looking at the other five divisions, I don't see that they're the best three teams in those divisions compete with this team, these teams. So,
You can make an argument for the AL East, but I agree that the Braves, Mets, and Phillies are the superior to that division as well.
By the way,
Hey,
for those
listen,
of you watching, I'm in my own place.
yeah. Uh, for what it's worth, 75 victories gets them six games better than they were last year. And I could see it. I really could see it.
It comes down to guys like Jazz Chisholm. You know, you talked about he's streaky. He's still young though. He can still improve. He can learn how to balance himself throughout a full 162 game season.
Exactly. All right, let's just get going with these here juggernauts. Let's just do it. Let's move on to the new. Let's move on to the New York Mets.
So I think the Mets broke the unspoken rule amongst owners. I know that during the offseason, there were a lot of owners that were not happy about Steve Cohen going out and just spending, $1 billion on free agents with the excessive payroll that the Mets have. It clears over $100 million over the luxury tax threshold. So their payroll for this year, including luxury tax penalties, is going to be close to $400 million, which is insane. That's just a record amount. Signings include Justin Verlander, which is, huge for them. Scherzer's going to be highlighting a 1-2 there. An unfortunate, speaking of injuries in the World Baseball, unfortunate injury for them, though. Edwin Diaz out for the season after celebrating a victory on the mound. Kind of a freak accident, and then there was that tweet that was circulating for a while that the World Baseball Classic needs to stop because MLB players are getting hurt. The reality is that's the dumbest tweet that I've read in the entire baseball offseason, because in case nobody's noticed, like, the MLB is only a small portion of what baseball actually is. Baseball is a sport played around the world. And sure, let's not brand the sport, for around the world activity. Let's just keep it inside the United States. That's a good idea.
No, I'm right there with you. The people who were giving Edwin Diaz and the Mets organization a hard time about the fact that Edwin Diaz got hurt, and it was just a freak accident. Sometimes with these leg injuries, we got another one coming up with the next team we'll talk about. It just happens, and it's unfortunate, but it could have happened while he was walking to the dugout at spring training. So I don't want to hear the whole, if he wasn't pitching the World Baseball Classic, it wouldn't have happened, because I disagree with that 1,000%. Not only that, there are comments out there like Trey Turner's won 2 World Series, played in 2 World Series. He hit a grand slam in the World Baseball Classic, and he said it's the most excited he's ever been to do anything in a baseball game.
Yeah, that's big stuff. There was a number out there that 98% of the TVs in Japan had the World Baseball Classic final on. Do you know what time it was in Japan when the World Baseball Classic final was playing? Like, it was at a ridiculous hour that people should not be at home watching TV, but they were.
98.4%.
That's how you grow the sport, and it's awesome. The World Baseball Classic doesn't happen every year. So it's nice to see that. It's nice to see, the all-stars go ahead, the juggernauts, the what-if teams that we talk about all the time. What if these players were all in the same line? Go ahead and go at it.
Yeah, agreed. I like the World Baseball Classic, but it is I mean, Edwin Diaz is one of the best closers in baseball, so it is a significant loss for the Mets. They do sign David Robertson, former Philly, former Cub, to a 1-year deal. Who's he's not as electric as Edwin Diaz, but he can get the job done as a closer. So I think they'll be okay in that scenario, but it definitely does drop them down in the division. Not being able to close out games is a big deal. So for me, even with the addition with Kodai Senjay, I'm never going to say his name right. Kodai Senjay.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and David Peterson. Am I reading the right thing here? I am reading the right thing.
I
And
mean,
David Peterson. They're still
they
the
just
middle team for me in this division.
Um, I would have agreed with you if Reese Hoskins had stayed healthy. Obviously, we'll touch on that here in a second. But I think with Harper already missing time and Hoskins being out for the season, I don't think that the Phillies get off to a good enough start. I think that the Mets are the second best team. That was the only difference that Bill and I had in our predictions. Was I have the Mets finishing second closely, and Bill has the Phillies finishing second closely. I'm assuming closely, but yeah, I have the Mets.
No, actually, I've got the Braves pulling away here. So I have the Mets and the Phillies within a
Well,
game of each other. So I
I
still think
mean,
they're close.
between second and third, second and third.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
I've got them within a game of each other. I got the Mets at 88 and 75.
I have the Mets at 94 and 68.
Okay,
I
those are
still think that
six. That's a six
that
game
they're just,
difference.
yeah, they're just a good enough team. I mean, if you look at the lineup, they're going to hit home runs. If you look at the 1-2 punch at the top of the rotation, I know Scherzer and Verlander combined to be 90,000 years old, but
78.
the reality is they're still very good pitchers. I mean, we
They
saw it
are.
from Verlander last year. So
They are. They are. I'm not putting anything down. I also just know that the Mets are going to Met. Look what they did last year. They lost the division to the Braves. It may be based on matchups. It got them the short end of the stick against the Padres there and completely changes the outlook of the playoffs. But I feel like the Mets are still going to Met, and the Eagles are going to pull out in September and take the second spot in the division. And it'll be that late. I still think the Phillies get to a slow start, but it'll be that late.
you said the Eagles there. I hope the Eagles are in first
Phillies.
place.
Sorry, Phillies. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we're still getting the gears turning here at BSing Sports. You know, it's our first baseball episode. Cut us some slack here. But a couple questions here. One, do you think Verlander and Scherzer are the best 1-2 punch in the division?
Man, I don't know.
I know what your heart wants to say. What's your brain thinking?
Is Soroka healthy yet?
Soroka just got sent down to AAA today. I'm assuming for a rehab, maybe, or he just isn't good.
Rehab. But to start this to start the season.
But I mean, even Max Fried and Spencer Strider is still a great one too.
And that's my point. I was kind of sort of leaning towards them because they're younger, and I think they'll be healthy longer. Verlander's dealt with injuries throughout his career. Scherzer is due for an injury, and Scherzer doesn't like this clock, so he might struggle. And that's the reality of the situation. Keep in mind that there's a whole new pitching approach because now Scherzer can't control the clock the way he used to. He's got to be on somebody else's clock, and that's going to be a problem for him. So,
you know who would have loved this pitching clock? Roy Halladay and Cliff Lee.
Yeah, they were just built different.
I mean, I think for like 3 years in a row, they were both top 5 and, you know, time between pitches averaged for the whole season or whatever. So I'm sure it was probably more for that, like more than 3 times for Halladay, but like 3 years in a row when I was keeping track of it, they were back to back.
Yeah, if you're twisting my arm right now, obviously, again, the top 3 teams in this division have great 1-2 punches. So the Phillies obviously have Nola, Wheeler, the Braves we just talked about, Freach, Strider. Experience says yes, it's the Mets. Versatility, probably the Braves, but like Iron Man, the Phillies.
All right, let me make it easier for you. I'm going into a 7-game series for the playoffs. Which 1-2 punch do I have? I want to have?
Mets.
So that's kind of where my head's at now. If I'm like a GM, if I'm the GM of whatever team, I probably want Strider and Fried. Like you said, they're younger. They're probably going to give me more years. Everybody on the Braves seems to take a little bit less money, so that way they can all stay together. Yeah. But the reality is, if I need to win a 7-game series, I'm calling on the guy who just finished with a sub-2 ERA, just won a World Series. And Scherzer, isn't a bad number 2. They're both first ballot Hall of Famers. So
I would agree with that take on it.
Unfortunately, Nola and Wheeler are probably the third best duo there. However, that's nothing to be ashamed about in any way, shape, or form. You could make the argument that they might be second. I would listen to it, but
you could. In addition to that, if you go past the first 2 pitchers and you move on to the third, I think the Phillies then jump up to number one because Tyson Walker is a great addition.
Yeah.
Um,
I remember Taiwan Walker was a prospect. He well. He deserved that credit.
yeah, I would agree with that.
I'm excited.
Let's move on
I'm
to
excited
the
to
Phillies.
see him. I'm excited to see him and Ranger Suarez. But speaking of them,
Yeah, let's get into the Phillies. Sorry, you're breaking up a bit, so I'm having a hard time gauging when you're talking.
yeah, as you touched on already, Rhys Hoskins and or as I touched on, I guess Rhys Hoskins, Bryce Harper, not going to be around for the beginning of the season. Hoskins is gone for the whole year. Leaves a massive hole at first base. Look, we have crapped on Rhys Hoskins religiously here at BSing Sports, and rightfully so. In big moments, his plate appearance, the way that he handles his plate appearances tends to disappear at times in moments where it shouldn't. You know, he seems to get out of his own realm of comfort. But it sucks. We're missing 30 home runs and 90 RBIs from a lineup that is already missing Harper potentially until the All-Star break.
Yeah, it's true. It's a huge loss. And again, freak accident. He was going back on a ground ball, relatively routine, and then he just pulled his left leg up and hit the ground. It's just extremely unfortunate. I think it did kind of sort of quiet the naysayers from Edwin Diaz's situation because Rhys Hoskins turned around and did it in a spring training game. Like, yeah,
the only long term. Go ahead.
No.
The only long-term positive to this is he is on a contract year and he's not going to produce anything coming off an injury. The Phillies might be able to get him a little bit cheaper.
Maybe. So here's my prediction for what the Phillies do. I kind of put it in the group chat, so you've already seen it. I'm going to put it out there for everybody else to hear. There's a lot of people online saying they need to go trade for somebody. I think you don't think you panic yet. Yes, it's 30 and 85, and I totally understand that. I don't think you panic yet. You move Bone lower to first base. You've got Edmundo Sosa, who can play third base. He did it last year for us several times. And then you keep Scott Kingery on the roster, a true utility man who's hitting, 412 in spring training right now with an over 1,000 OPS. Because he's a right-handed bat and can back Marsh up in center field. Very specific on that because, yes, Jake Cave is playing better this spring. However, because Jake Cave is a left-handed bat and they're going to keep Derek Hall at DH as a left-handed bat, I think you need the right-handed bat on the bench. So I think Kingery makes the roster. Now, listen, you're competing. You're one of the top 3 teams in this division. It's looking like you got a shot at the playoffs. A trade deadline comes around. Kick somebody's tires. Absolutely kick somebody's tires. But remember that you're going to get Rhys Hoskins at a cheap deal in the offseason. That's all I'm trying to say. Please don't panic, Dave Dombrowski, and go do something stupid.
Well, see, the scenario there isn't bad because if they want to go out and get a cheap rental first baseman for cheap, they can because they know that they don't feel obligated to sign to a long-term contract at the end of the season. But I agree. Don't panic yet. We're not even in the regular season yet. We have no idea what these teams are going to look like, right? Harper was not put on the 60-day IL, so we have no idea when he's going to come back. It sounds like he might come back earlier than expected, or else they probably would have put him on there. But if he comes back, 45 games in instead of 60 games into the season, then we're having a different conversation because that would be huge. But this puts all the pressure on Trey Turner, Kyle Schwarber, and I'll tell you what, Nick Castellanos has to turn it around. I mean, he's still swinging at those breaking balls down and away. I'm hoping that, he's just leading these pitchers on to think that he's going to have another bad season and that he's going to turn it around in the regular season. He is the guy that really needs to turn it around with these injuries that the Phillies have suffered in the lineup. And the pressure comes on the pitchers now, too. They have to pitch great. You're probably not going to get the offensive support in the beginning of the season. That's okay. But we've got 3 big arms that are making some pretty big money, and Ranger can do the job too. So,
in addition to the fact that they really bolstered the bullpen, bullpen has been weak for the Phillies for several years. They go out and they trade for Soto from the Tigers. Fan favorites Matt Vierling, Nick Maton in that deal. However, we get Soto in the bullpen, which is a huge addition for the bullpen.
And Roger Clemens' son.
He's probably going to start the season at AAA because he's a left-handed bat. These are things that all need to be taken into account now because 30 home runs from the right side of the plate is no longer in play. So, yeah, they made a couple of other bullpen additions. I don't have the list right here in front of me, and I apologize. But I think the Phillies are going to be okay.
I
And
cannot believe you forgot our closer, Craig Kimbrell.
future Hall of Famer Craig Kimbrell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did forget Kimbrell. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I got to sit on the pod like this now. Do you
But
remember
yeah,
that? I know you remember that game against the Braves where everybody.
I
got
do. Though everybody in the background, yeah. So listen, I got the Phillies. Like I said, I got them above the Mets here because I think the Mets are going to Met. The Phillies will catch them. I got the Phillies winning 90 games.
I have the Phillies winning 92 games, 2 games behind the Mets. I have them going 92 and 70. I think the rotation keeps them at bay. I think that they compete early in the season. I just think the lack of offense is going to be a little bit too much to overcome. It's going to be there. You know, they have an okay lineup without Harper, without Hoskins, but without them, you know, it's going to be tough to score runs. So.
Ali Brandt comments, Nick, meaning Castellanos, needs to stop swinging at the first pitch every freaking time. She didn't say freaking when she was, talking to me on the couch about it, but yes, I agree with that.
You know that Ali Brandt?
Say that again?
You know Ali Brandt?
Yeah, sometimes I hang out with her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
She's all right.
She's all right. She one of the fans, man. Good for you.
Let's move on to the Braves.
Let's move on to the best team in the division. Honestly, I don't know what else to say about the Braves other than Alex Anthopoulos should probably win GM of the year every year.
Every freaking year. It's the truth.
You got guys Riley gets paid 10 years, $200 million, which is peanuts for somebody like him. He's a stud. He's hitting over 300, slugging over 500. I mean, dude plays pretty good defense at third. They go out and replace Freddie Freeman, don't really miss a beat with Matt Olson, Spencer Strider, Max Fried. I mean, they just breed talent down there in Atlanta. I don't know what's in the water in the farm system down there, but they've got talent. It's a lot of it's homegrown too.
Yeah, let's not forget Vaughn Grissom's going to be starting a shortstop this year because they lose Dansby Swanson to the Cubs. But Vaughn Grissom in a small workload. Yeah, they're excited about it. I mean, Orlando Arcia was a placeholder. Everybody knew that. So I mean, listen, the lineup is still going to be good. They're going to compete. They've got good pitchers. They're deep at every aspect of the game. And I agree, the GM there just needs to win GM of the year every year. Tons and tons of praise for the Braves. Lucky the Phillies beat them in the playoffs flat out. The Phillies just went in hot, got hot, and went to the World Series, and that's sometimes how it goes, right? Braves, 97 wins. They don't crack 100 in this division because the other two teams are still super, super competitive. I got the Braves at 97.
I promise we didn't discuss this before the show, but I do have them at 97 and 65 as well for the same exact reasons of I think that the Mets and Phillies can compete with them. Now, I have the top three teams in the division closer than you do. But I just don't think the rest of the NL is as strong, which also plays into the Phillies' favorite of the fact that they have won, divisional series in the first 53 games, which if that's all the time Harper's going to miss, that's going to be huge.
It's going to be real huge. And listen, you get Harper back in that 53 game span, and you're hypothetically right there with the Braves or the Mets for the lead in the division. I think they pulled the trigger on trading for a first baseman much quicker. But it really depends on how it all shakes out. Like I said, they're in a bad spot. The Phillies are without having a true first baseman right now. Excuse me, sorry, and it's just unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree. Shohei Ohtani's a free agent. They might be able to get him cheap. Just kidding.
No way. He'll go to the Dodgers.
The Dodgers did not have a fantastic offseason, but we will get into that. I mean, if they wanted to, Josh Bell's a free agent next year. They could go get him cheap. Joey Votto, who is, 80,000 years old. He's just shy of Justin Verlander. No, I think he's actually older than them. But there's a couple of cheap first basemen that they could probably go and get without, giving up an arm and a leg that would help with that spot, should they be where we think they will be.
Yeah, I would agree with that, yeah. All right, so that's all we got for NL East predictions. It actually went much quicker than I assumed it would.
Yeah, I think that this division is kind of, outside of the Phillies and the Mets, I think everybody, barring something absolutely insane, it's pretty clear-cut where everybody's going to finish, Like, we differ on the Phillies and the Mets, but I think most people would agree the Braves are the best team, the Nationals are the worst. Marlins can't compete with the other three teams. So
Yeah, it's the Marlins just can't seem to get out of their own way, which is unfortunate for them, not
yeah,
for the rest.
yeah. I mean, they had one of the best outfields in baseball and sold everybody when Derek Jeter took over the team. So
Yeah, I couldn't help but notice he sold Stanton to the Yankees.
do both? Ken Brandt asks, do both wild cards come from the NL East? It's very likely that happens again this year.
Yeah, I would say yes.
I think the only competitors are really. See, that's not true because the Cubs had a pretty good offseason too. So I think the NL Central is still the weakest of the NL divisions, but I think they got a little bit better. The NL West is the NL West. The Dodgers are the Dodgers. So it's tough to say. The Padres are a good team too.
Yeah, the Padres are a good team too. But I mean, you had all those teams in the playoffs last year. But everything you said is spot on. I think the two NL wild cards come out of the NL East. I do.
It really all depends to me on Harper. In all honesty, because I think the Mets finish in second place, so I think that they get one. How quickly does Harper come back?
I'm hoping you're right, and it's like 45 games, man. That would be ideal.
They got to know something because the fact that they just didn't throw him on the 60-day IL I mean, even if it was just like close enough, even if they were like, he's going to miss 55 games, let's just put him on there, give him the extra 5 days rest. No, it sounds like I'm assuming it's going to be closer to the 45 game mark, but that might be a little optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, he was seen taking ground balls. I didn't see him throwing, but he's not going to play the field this year anyway. If he can swing a bat, that's all he did last year.
Yeah, using the Ohtani timeline, I think the end of June was probably, right around there.
That's what I think everybody was originally saying. And then he obviously showed up at camp, looked good, felt good, and now everything has changed.
Yeah, and people are different, Shohei Ohtani was a pitcher and had Tommy John surgery. Maybe his injury was worse. So
yeah, I apologize for the noise in the background. I cannot turn it off. I'm in the middle of a baseball draft right now.
I can't hear it, so I don't know that anybody else.
Okay, good. Okay, that's good.
Who are your keepers since we're talking baseball?
So in the first round I had Goldie, fourth round Brandon Woodruff, fifth round Jazz Chisholm, sixth round Blake Snell, eighth round Chris Bassett, and all the way down in the 13th round Adley Rutschman, and in the 17th Bryson Stott.
I like that Adley Rutschman in the 13th. That's great value.
Yeah, I'll have him for the next forever.
Speaking of catchers, I mean, Sean Murphy to the Braves is huge. I think what's being overlooked, JT Realmuto is going to be even more valuable starting next year because starting next year, we're getting robot umps with the strike zone being, cookie cutter. It's going to be vanilla crisp. It's going to be not, subjective anymore. Pitch framing isn't going to matter a whole lot anymore. So the guys that are in the lineup because they're great pitch framers and buy their pitcher strikes, that's going away. So now you're looking at your catcher like, what can you do well? Can you throw base runners out and can you hit the ball? Guess what? JT Realmuto frames pitches well, but guess what? JT Realmuto does better than every other catcher in baseball? Throws runners
guys out.
Baseball. So
yeah,
if he wasn't valuable enough, the main aspect as to why you see a lot of defensive catchers in there, it's going away. The pitch framing metrics are going to be a thing of the past.
Yeah. We could get into that in another episode. I'm not a huge fan of robot umpires.
I think from a nostalgic standpoint, being as I didn't grow up with robot umpires, it's a little uneasy for me to accept, but ultimately I think it's going to be good for the game of baseball. Some of these ridiculous calls in big time scenarios where umpires are humans, they feel adrenaline too. And in the blink of a moment, they have to make a call, especially balls and strikes where they're non-reviewable. And, we as, fans, hundreds of thousands of people jumping down umpires' throats for making a split-second decision that they can barely comprehend anyway. So I think we just need to take it out of their hands.
Yeah, that's fair. That is a fair take on it. The imperfection of the game is what makes the game perfect, in my opinion. But I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. Is like, well, umpires have been screwing the game up for 100+ years. Why are we changing it now? Because we
exactly.
can.
Yeah, that's fair.
If we have a way to fix it, why wouldn't we?
That's true. That is true. But yeah, you got anything else?
No, not for this episode. Stay tuned. We'll be continuing to do the division reviews in the upcoming shows. And Jake and I are still talking fantasy football on the podcasts, which are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you can get your podcasts. So,
Yes. So yeah, thanks for joining us here on BSing Sports, part of the BSing Network, where we do a little BS and we talk a whole lot of sports. You guys have a great night.